C'est bon, c'est lancé.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Thank you very much for taking your time to join this webcast on where the future of payment is heading. We will follow the structure of a recent infographics that we created, and if you want to explore it further, there is a link to it in your invitation. So for the next 30 minutes or so, we will look at where the future is heading for payments. Now, this is obviously a vast subject, but we will frame it by looking at it through 4 angles. 1, new ways for consumers to pay, new payment instruments put in the hands of the customers. For example, contactless payment cards, wearables, mobile P2P payments. 2, new ways for merchants to let consumers pay. For example, MPOS, connected screens, and in-app payments. 3, new ways for consumers to bank, combining anytime, anywhere services with the trusted bank branch. And 4, last but not least, new ways to cater for the security of the consumer, going from regulation over digital IDs to biometric cards. So, if we start by looking at new ways for consumers to pay, new payment instruments, we can take a step back and remember that not so long ago, we pretty much had 2 ways to pay. Either we handed over cash to a cashier in store, or we dipped or swiped our card to a point of sales terminal. Whereas today, we pay in so many different ways. We can tap our contactless card, our watch, our wristband. If we go and shop online, we might use PayPal or a pay button, having our cards on file to pay. We can order and pay for our Uber without even noticing that we actually pay. And in many countries, we can pay our friend the $10 we owe him or her by a few taps in a mobile P2P app. So our payments every day is very multifaceted today. Now, the one mega trend that we see in payments is cash being replaced by non-cash payment method. This is happening at a different pace in different places in the world. If you look at Scandinavia, for example, cash has almost disappeared altogether as a means of payments in store. Whereas in other mature European economies, cash payments still pretty much corresponds to 1 payment out of 4 in store. And if you look in many countries in Africa and some countries in Asia, cash payments still represent more than 3 payments out of 4 in store. So all of this to say that there is still a lot of cash out there to replace. And in many markets, cash has gradually been replaced by card payments. But in other markets, we see how mobile wallets, for example, Alipay and WeChat Pay, have grown rapidly and massively have replaced cash for in-store payments. Now, the most recent developments that we see, given the current situation that we all live in since a couple of weeks and months, seems to be that transformations that already were set in motion are being reinforced, are being amplified. Consumers buy more online, not the least grocery shopping. Consumers do more P2P payments remotely instead of having to meet up with the person physically to exchange cash or bill coins. And not the least, consumers pay more and more in contactless. Only some months ago, it was forecasted that 1 contactless payment out of 3 would be, one card payment out of 3 globally would be done in contactless mode. But now this number might very well turn out to be even higher. What we also see is how mobile payments at point of sales slowly start to actually pick up pace. When mobile in-store payments were introduced some years ago, the projections were very enthusiastic. And the growth has turned out to be maybe a little bit less spectacular than the initial forecast. But according to a recent study, mobile payments at point of sales in North America went from 3% in 2018 to 6% in 2019. So from 3% in 2018 to 6% in 2019. So quite a growth. We have to wait for some more, studies to see if this trend is confirmed, but things might start moving in this direction. And this is not the least as the contactless infrastructure has been built out. So there are more NFC capable terminals, and there are also more eligible devices. So, smartphones that can carry out an NFC payment, and also that customers are getting aware and familiar with this way of paying. So this one is to be followed. Another emerging payment trend that I was sort of mentioning before is, and still it's limited to a few countries, is mobile P2P payments. So, like we said, I can actually pay my friend the $10 that I owe him or her by a few taps in a smartphone, instead of having to meet up physically with my friend, handing over a coin or handing over a $10 bill. So with a P2P app, obviously I can do this anywhere, anytime, and I can do this remotely. I don't have to be at the same location as my friend. And for such a P2P app to be convenient, it must somehow reach scale. Because if I know that 90% of all my friends are using this app, it's pretty interesting for me to join. Whereas if I know that only consumers of Bank X or smartphone brand Y use the app, I still have to pay most of my friends the way I always did, paying them in cash. So that makes me less inclined to change my old ingrained behavior. And consequently, we see that some of the world's most successful P2P solutions are the ones where all the major banks in a country cooperate on a common solution. For example, Swish, which is a wallet backed by the major Swedish bank, and this is now being used by a whopping 70% of Swedes. And that is all Swedes together. So that means children and elderly. So pretty much 100% of the Swedish active population is using this mobile P2P app. In Norway and Denmark, we have similar numbers. We have Vipps in Norway and MobilePay in Denmark. And it's, as we said earlier, it's what we see is cash being replaced. And so in Scandinavia, we have seen how cash used to be, existing for P2P payments, but how it's now disappearing. And a typical Norwegian customer will make several mobile P2P payments a week, but at the same time use his or her credit card 475 times a year. So 475. That actually makes the Norwegians world champions in card payments. So that was new ways for consumers to pay. New payments instruments put in the hands of the consumers. Now, let's continue by looking at new ways merchants let consumers pay. And so minutes ago, we spoke about Uber. And when you order an Uber, you actually do check in at the start of the consumer journey when you open the Uber app. So when the cab driver comes and picks you up, he knows who you are. However, once your Uber ride is over, you do not check out by handing over cash or a payment card to the cab driver to pay for the ride. You just walk out of the cab. The payment is being done invisibly without any intervention from your side. So, and if we look at traditional consumer journeys, it's the other way around. If I, for example, walk into a supermarket, I just walk in, I don't check in at the start of the consumer journey. However, at the end of the journey, I do check out. I stand in line, I have a cashier scanning all the items that I bought, and I hand over a card or cash to the cashier to pay. So in these new consumer journeys, you can say that they are being reversed. You do check in at the end of the process, but you don't check out. Sorry, you do check in at the start of the process, but you don't check out at the end of the process, which obviously renders the consumer journey much more convenient. Another well-known example is how is to order and pay in app is Starbucks. So, for example, instead of going into a Starbucks, standing in line, waiting for my turn to be served, and having my latte macchiato prepared, I can actually sit on the subway on the way to work and pay an order for my coffee in my app. And then when I come to the Starbucks, I just walk in, pick my prepared coffee up, and leave the Starbucks within a matter of seconds. Now, this is obviously a huge improvement in consumer journey for somebody who's coming late to work, but still want to kick off the day with a fresh brewed coffee. If we come back to cab drivers, if you don't take an Uber, there's a fair chance that a couple of years ago, your cab driver would only have accepted cash as a means of payment. Today, however, it's likely that your cab driver actually accepts card payments because he either has an M-Post device, or he actually has his smartphone transformed into an acceptance device. Another example of how merchants let consumers pay is from Seoul in South Korea. So here, actually, what they have done is they have taken complete walls in busy metro stations, and they have put a huge screen on the wall. And this screen has then replicated a supermarket shelf. So you have seen, milk, you have seen cheese, you have seen orange juice, etc. on the wall. And the consumers can then just take, for example, the card, tap to the item they wish, and it's being added to their shopping cart. As opposed to actually physically going to the supermarket, physically picking out the milk, the cheese, etc., and put it in a physical shopping cart. A last example that I really like is coming from some busy pubs, mainly in London, I think, where actually they have put NFC readers on beer pumps. So what I can do then is I walk into the pub, I tap my card, my payment card to the beer pump, and the beer pump unlocks, allowing me to pour in a pint of beer in my own glass, in a glass. And this, of course, is to be compared to maybe standing in lines for 50 minutes to wait to be served. So a great improvement for my consumer journey. So, as we spoke about earlier, the ongoing transformation has really been reinforced in the wake of the current situation that we all live in. Another such transformation that really has been amplified in most recent time is mobile banking. We've seen that mobile banking adoption has just been off the charts. And mobile banking is strongly driven by anywhere, anytime, instant services. And yes, many bank branches has been closed during recent years, not the least as services that previously were carried out in the bank branch is now carried out by the consumer itself via computer or via smartphone. And for example, the whole onboarding process can be done in a few minutes for a smartphone today. Now, however, this development is far from being one-sided. Yes, true. We do see banks close certain bank branches on the one hand, but on the other hand, we see them open new bank branches or completely refurbish existing branches. And many banks, for example, Lloyds, Santander, Capital One, and Chase, they are even including a coffee shop operated by a barista in brand new bank branches being equipped with, furnished with, a living room style sofas located on the very best high street addresses. And very interestingly, research shows that over 50%, so 50, over 50% of US millennials, digital natives, actually still regularly visit bank branches. Another research shows that the preference for applying for a mortgage in a bank branch is 3 times higher than doing so via mobile app. Sorry. So we see a development where basic everyday tasks are being carried out via mobile banking, but how the bank branch still has an immense value for operations where consumers appreciate the face-to-face human interaction. And the bank branch can be leveraged, for example, for instant issuance of the payment card. So instead of the consumer waiting for the payment card to arrive with postal services in quite a few days, the consumers can just walk down to the closest bank branch, sit down in one of these nice sofas, having a nice coffee, and just wait for a couple of minutes for his or her brand new bank card to be delivered. And this is, of course, a golden opportunity to interact with the customer and create a stronger link with him or her, and, for example, cross or upsell products and services. So what we see here is new consumers, excuse me. So what we see here are new consumer journeys and new payment habits. And while the consumer journey becomes increasingly simplified, the security measures, of course, must be adapted to follow the development, because consumer trust is really the basis of any form of payment, and regulation is evolving as the payment ecosystem develops. 2 fairly recent regulations in Europe are GDPR and PSD2. So GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation, aims to give citizens control over their personal data that is being collected and stored by companies. PSD2, or the second payment directive, is, for example, introducing strong customer authentication for sensitive online transactions. Strong customer authentications means that the consumer must identify him or herself via 2 out of 3 elements out of something you are, for example, biometrics, something you know, could be a password, and something you have, for example, a registered device. In the US, we see how the state of California is leading the way with the California Consumer Privacy Act, that, just like the GDPR in Europe, aims to enhance privacy rights. But unfortunately, the development is not all rosy. For example, we see how CMP, or if you like, payments for e-commerce, we see how CMP fraud is increasing, and actually 3 fraud transactions out of 4 originates from card not present. So the challenge for any solution is to strike the balance between security and convenience to make convenience secure. And we see now how consumers find innovations such as digital onboarding, biometrics, and dynamic CVV striking this balance. Now, we earlier mentioned how ongoing transformations in the payment ecosystem is accelerating ongoing transformations. A very concrete example of this is the threshold for contactless payment transactions being increased, meaning that consumers can pay for higher sums by just tapping the card. A way to make this convenience even securer is to authenticate the transaction with a biometric card. This means that the cardholder only needs to touch the fingerprint sensor on the card's surface to make sure that it is the eligible cardholder and nobody else that is holding the card in the hand. We also spoke about there currently being a spike in e-commerce volumes, and that unfortunately that also leads to an increase in CMP fraud. And a way to make convenience secure in this context is cards with dynamic CVV. This means that the consumer can continue to pay in the way that he or she has always does and is comfortable with, but since the CVV on the back of the card will be changed on a regular interval, should somebody regrettably intercept that CVV, it will be of little use. So in all of this, what about the payment cards? Well, as more and more of the physical touch points between a bank and its customer are being reduced. We spoke about bank branches earlier, but think about monthly account statements in paper format sent to your letterbox. You don't receive them anymore, do you? So as these physical touch points are being reduced, you could argue that the card is the last physical link between a bank and its customers. And consequently, we do see how banks leverage the bank card by innovative designs to strengthen the loyalty and reinforce the brand even further. And very interestingly, we also witness how the most digital of the digital, so the fintechs and the big techs, the tech giants, they are not only issuing physical cards, but in many instances even metal cards. And these cards have proven an excellent tool in segmenting the customer base and in conveying values such as sober, modern, elegant. And so, where will this all leave us? Well, we think that it's reasonable to imagine that the importance of the card as a carrier of the bank's brand, as a tool to create loyalty to the bank, will only increase in the future payments. So that is now taking us to the end of my presentation. We will now open up for questions. So please type in any question you may have in the Q&A field, and we will do our best to answer them. And I will check now. We already have quite a few questions that have come in. Okay, here is a question from David. David is asking, what about super apps? How do you see the impact of super apps in payments? Hi, David. Thank you. That's a great question. And for those of you who are not familiar with the term super app is an app that originally was being done for one single purpose, for example, instant messaging. And as this app grew popular and gained a huge public for the single purpose, it actually leveraged this huge public by adding more services to the app. You can think about services such as e-commerce, grocery deliveries, legal services, medical services, media, social media, education, gaming, and not the least, financial services. And the more time the customers spend within the ecosystem of the app, the easier it is to provide hyper-personalized offers in real time. And I think that the most well-known examples of super apps are WeChat and Alibaba. WeChat started out as an instant messaging platform, and Alibaba as an e-commerce marketplace around 20 years ago. And today, they have not only grown into massive super apps, offering all kinds of services, but very interestingly, in this context, they have created their own payment methods, Alipay and WeChat Pay. And these payment methods are not only used within the super app, but they actually now comprise almost 50% of domestic point-of-sale payments. And actually, during the last weeks, there has been almost daily announcements of apps that could be on the way to transform into super apps. It was Google, for example, Google Pay announced, I think it was called Nearby Spots in India, allowing customers to find nearby stores selling essential goods like groceries. I think also was Google Pay who announced that customers of certain banks in Singapore will be able to make peer-to-peer payments through Google app, which I think makes Singapore the third country following India and US to have this feature. And Google also announced a feature for Google Maps. There was shortcuts for takeout and delivery. So, the customers can then see nearby restaurants offering takeaway. And, some restaurants even enable consumers to order directly through Google Maps. So yes, David, we definitely think that super apps will have an important impact on the future payments. Thank you for that question. Okay, I will see if there are quite a few questions here. Just bear with me a second. So Claudia is asking, how do you see the smartphone and the physical card going forward? Hi, Claudia. So I guess what you mean is how the smartphone and the physical card will play together. So in most recent times, we have seen some fantastic examples of how card issuers actually take the best out of two worlds, out of the physical card and out of the smartphone. So from the physical card, it's trusted, people are familiar with it, people are used to pay with it, consumers know it will work everywhere around the world. And this is then being combined with the interactive and the real-time aspects of the smartphone. For example, enabling consumers to unfreeze temporarily and temporarily freeze and unfreeze their card, showing super user-friendly alerts on the card transactions, so you can see on a map where the transaction took place, etc. And if it's a credit card, having a very intuitive dashboard where the consumers can see, for example, what the interest will be if he or she revolves so and so much of credit at any date in the future. So we think that the card and the physical card and the smartphone will blend together to create just like fantastic future payment experiences. Okay, we are running towards the end now. I think we will have time for one more last question. So let's see here. So Ali is asking us, what is the development like for IoT payments? Hi Ali, and thanks for your question. So what we do see is that the number of IoT devices with payment functionality is increasing rapidly. And lately, there's been quite a lot of announcements for in-car payments, paying for road tolls, paying for fuel, paying for charging, paying for parking, etc. for the car. And I think it was Shell and Chrysler and Jeep, I think, announced a solution where the consumer can pay for the gas, for the fuel, from the infotainment system of the car. And it was Amazon and Exxon who announced a solution where you actually use Alexa. So actually telling Alexa to open up the pump for you to fuel your gas. So one solution using touchscreen, the other one using voice. And no matter of which solution that will prevail in the future, what we have seen is that for any payment novelties to really become mainstream, it is important there is just one standard and not fragmented solutions. And we think this will be the key for IoT payments as well. So I think that has now taken us to the end of this session. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you found it worthwhile to tune in to this webcast, and we hope you will be with us again for future webcasts. Thank you very much, and bye now.